Welcome to HealthSpan Digest. In the next 20 to 30 minutes, I'm going to leave you with one action item you can start today to extend your health span. This weekly podcast is dedicated to translating the science of health and longevity into realistic and easy to follow steps. Our topics range from nutrition to exercise to sleep and healthy habits to navigating stress, injuries, and limited time. And here's the disclaimer: this is not medical advice. It's just my observations from a nearly 30-year career in the rehab and fitness industries. And with that, let's get rolling. Let's talk about Ryan, a 37-year-old, 6'4", 253-pound guy who is pushing 20% body fat. Now, the significance of those numbers for me as a health span and performance coach is that it's just that. It's numbers, it's data. And with data, we can figure out any sort of program or health changes that change the data. Ryan had some very specific health concerns, some medical concerns. And the great news is that over the past 10 and a half weeks, as of this recording, he's dropped 20 pounds of body weight and dropped his percentage of body fat down to 16% from 20% and is still following. Also, huge jump in overall strength, stamina, and his trend lines are looking great. Again, the significance of this is that they are data points. They're data points that fat and body weight are numbers that we can move, we can change with a really thoughtful program, but we need the data. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Ryan in a few minutes, but today we're going to talk about fat, body fat, specifically visceral fat, the dangers of visceral fat, how to measure it, and how to reduce it. My name is Aaron Shaw. I am from HealthSpan Physio Coaching, and I love talking about the 5 pillars of HealthSpan: exercise, nutrition, emotional well-being, sleep, and preventative care. I have a roster full of coaching clients where are my full-time coaching clients, but I also do single session virtual consults for people that are interested in either a specific pillar or want an overview snapshot consultation that provide that service as well. So if that piques your interest, you can check out my contact information with the show notes. But let's start talking about visceral fat. What is visceral fat? What does that even mean? Now, when we think of fat, we think of, for most of us, it's going to be thinking about our belly fat, or trying to button up your favorite jeans, or your hips are getting too big and we think, oh, I have fat around my thighs, I have fat around my belly. But there's a very real danger to a specific type of fat that I'm going to talk about, and that is visceral fat. And visceral fat is the fat that surrounds our internal organs and is in our abdominal cavity. So the other type of fat is subcutaneous fat, and this is just below the skin, and it's the fat that really wraps around our midsection. And this is kind of the pinch test. Like, if you can pinch your love handles, you're pinching subcutaneous fat. You're not really this visceral fat, because the visceral fat is really embedded around our internal organs. Visceral fat wraps around our liver, our pancreas, our intestines. And before I totally go off on how bad visceral fat is, we have to acknowledge that it is essential for function. It does provide some cushioning and protection for the organs, and there are some hormones that are secreted through our visceral fat. So we do need to have some visceral fat. The good news is we've all got some. However, too much visceral fat, too much of this fat that's kind of webbed in between all of our organs, can lead to inflammation, high blood pressure, and a lot of other metabolic conditions that we'll talk about in a few minutes, and ultimately be very serious health problems, serious health concerns. Now, there is a relationship between subcutaneous fat, the kind you can pinch, and visceral fat. So they're often will rise and fall together because there's a relationship with lifestyle factors that contribute to both of those types of fat increasing or decreasing. But let's talk about this visceral fat, and really what is a good or healthy amount of visceral fat. If we know that we need to have some of this fat in our body, what is a good amount to have? And I will share some of the numbers that I get. I get my measurements taken a couple of months ago now, and I'll tell you what that process was like. But first, let's figure out what is a good amount of visceral fat. And unfortunately, you can't just step on a scale and get a number that says, here's what you have for visceral fat, or I should say, as of this recording, maybe at a certain point in time, we'll all have scales in our home that will tell us, visceral fat, subcutaneous fat, bone density, and the whole 9 yards. But as of right now, it takes another extra step to actually get this data to be available to us. But generally speaking, a good or healthy amount of visceral fat is around a pound. So around a pound of visceral fat is considered generally healthy. I had my fat tested along with some other variables tested, and mine was 0.8 pounds, so a little bit less than a pound. So personally, which I was glad to see, I was in the healthy range, or normal or healthy range, and that is something that having that number is important for me to have now, because it's a number that I can go back to through years to come and see how my lifestyle is affecting this very necessary type of fat. That, again, this visceral fat is necessary, but also to make sure that it's not tipping into the point where the negative consequences are going to impact my health and impact my health span and my lifespan. Let's talk about the risks associated with visceral fat. There are several risks that are, thankfully, for the most part, controllable. But first, what are the risks? If you have excess visceral fat, you are at a higher risk for metabolic syndrome. These syndromes could include high blood pressure, high blood sugar, excess body fat around the waist, and abnormal cholesterol levels. And you don't need to be a medical person to understand that those are all things that in our minds sound like not very good. So we really want to make sure that we have our visceral fat within a level that is safe for us. And when we have too much visceral fat, too much fat webbed in between our organs, we have all of these risks. Risks of those collective components are really increased risk for developing cardiovascular disease, which is a killer, and type 2 diabetes, neither of which you want to be dealing with. Cardiovascular disease, really the visceral fat releases these inflammatory markers, if you will, that will be released into the liver, which can ultimately change the cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, and triglycerides. And so those things, without getting too sciencey, increase the risk of heart disease. Type 2 diabetes, this visceral fat will contribute to the insulin resistance, which is a precursor to type 2 diabetes, which is, again, I think is really part of an epidemic in our country right now, that this excess visceral fat has this cascade of problems that lead to heart problems, risk for diabetes, and liver problems. So there's a condition called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So that's when there's excess fat that is around the liver that builds up and can lead to inflammation and liver damage. And I think that we may be familiar with the concept of liver damage from people who consume too much alcohol, which is a whole other major problem. But the excess fat around the liver can have similar consequences as somebody who is an alcoholic and has related liver disease. So again, another reason that we want to minimize this visceral fat, minimize this inflammation, minimize the risk of cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndromes, all of those nasty things that we don't want. So we can acknowledge that visceral fat, again, this fat that's around our organs, is not something that we want to be dealing with. And certainly we want to be able to look in the mirror and not first thing think about our love handles per se, and that is something that we can we'll touch on here in a minute, but it's almost more important that we are conscious of this visceral fat even than our subcutaneous fat. Now they tend to rise and fall together, but when we get this these fats really kind of measured, then we can look and see the relationship or the ratio of these types of fats, and we can do something about it. So it's one thing we want to look in the mirror and feel confident with our body structure perhaps, but it is life and death when we have excess visceral fat. So how do we decrease this? Well, the good news is that is part of what I do as a HealthSpan coach, and as I give Ryan as the example to begin with numbers, with data, we can make measured progress. And there are very specific ways that you can control and change the amount of visceral fat that you have in your body. And these are, in essence, kind of the pillars of HealthSpan in and of themselves. but it's worth reviewing and drilling home. You're going to know these, and you're going to feel like, be reminded again, I suppose, that there is no magic silver bullet. It is a series of small things that add up over time for better or worse. And if we add up a bunch of small things that lead to, more problems, lead to, worse outcomes, then we're going to have to pay very dire consequences when it comes to our health and our health span. But the flip side is also true. I'm going to give you this list of reasonable things that can decrease your visceral fat and decrease your subcutaneous fat. Yes, it will improve your body mass index. It will improve your physicality. All of this list I'm going to give you is really the list to live by to live a healthy, vibrant life. To reduce your visceral fat, one thing you can do is manage your diet or control your diet, starting with reducing your sugar and refined carbs. So if there's anything that's, I think, a huge part of our challenge with the health of Americans, at least, is this massive addiction to sugary sweet drinks. If nothing else, try exchanging soda or pop, whatever you want to call it, depending on where you're from, with something else, with water, for example, with an electrolyte drink. But reducing sugar and refined carbohydrates will help reduce your fat. You can increase your fiber intake, more fruits, more vegetables, more whole grains. You can have healthy fats. And now this is kind of where it gets complicated. Like, I thought fat was bad. No, fat is okay. But there is healthy fat, and there is a reasonable dosing, like how much healthy fat or unhealthy fat, which is a whole other conversation again, I suppose, which is how much of anything, because you can have too much even of a good thing. But fat is good. There are healthier fats, and these would be found in avocados, nuts, seeds, olive oil. These are good fats to have incorporated into our diet. And really, I think that when it comes to diet, and this is what I've really worked with very closely with my client, Ryan, that I've been speaking of, is having a balanced diet. And I think that it's tough to really kind of give a strong sales pitch for a balanced diet, because most of us want a quick fix. We want something that's branded, that has prepackaged meals, and is sponsored by some really famous person or some bodybuilder, something with this, somebody with an amazing body, and we think that that's going to be the magical diet. But ultimately, a balanced diet that is rich in whole foods, real foods, that you go to the store and you go pick out actual foods, not things that are just packaged up in a box and has a little packet that you tear open and pour in some magic mixture of flavoring and whatnot. But real whole foods that you have to come home, boil or steam and chop up. That is the single best thing you can do for really controlling your fueling, your nutrition. Real foods, lean protein, colorful vegetables, fruits. It is essential to start tracking, even on occasion, one day a week or one day every couple of weeks. Track what you are consuming for food, and you will have great insight. Again, to refer to my client Ryan, we started off really kind of taking a look at what he was using for fuel and relating that to both his percentage of body fat and body weight, and the physical demands that we were placing him under as we started to introduce an exercise program, consistent exercise program. But there were some quick wins that when you track your diet, when you take a look at what you're consuming, that will stand out on fairly simple, not necessarily easy, but simple solutions, simple changes that you can make to improve your fruit and vegetable intake, cut down on things that are very clearly going to contribute to your visceral fat, cut down on processed foods, cutting down on high calorie foods, cutting down on sugary things that you would consume. But it takes a little bit of forethought to track this, just like tracking your visceral fat, your percentage of body fat takes measurements. And once we have measurements, once we can measure a diet, once we can measure nutrition intake, we can really influence that and get some big wins out of it. So there's the pitch for dietary change: to reduce your fat, reduce sugar and carbs, increase fiber. Healthy fats are good. Again, avocado, nuts, and seeds. and think balanced food, lean proteins. So again, this could be a chicken breast with, this is so cliche, I know that, the chicken breast with broccoli and a side of mashed potatoes or something like that. It is super cliche, but really the numbers speak for themselves. It works. And so even just integrating that on occasion, that a meal like that sounds so unfathomable to integrate into your regular nutritional diet, your regular routine. At least doing that on occasion, dip your toe into the water of that balanced diet. The good news, which I'll also throw in here, is that visceral fat, this nasty fat that we're talking about, is actually, some of the stuff I've read shows that it's actually easier to lose than subcutaneous fat. So maybe this is a double-edged sword, because maybe those of us that may want to lose the love handles may want that to be gone first. But ultimately, it's this visceral fat that is more dangerous. So the good news in that perspective is that visceral fat is actually tends to be easier to lose than subcutaneous fat. And really, it's because it metabolizes quicker and your body can get rid of it quicker in sweat or urine. So some of these changes that I'm going to talk about, I'll talk about a few more here, can have a pretty substantial impact in a relatively short amount of time if you can stick with these, if you can kind of go through these. So aside from nutrition, aside from the diet side of it, we have exercise. And I think I've said this in every episode that I've recorded, or most every episode. If you do nothing else, if you sincerely want to extend your life, if you really want to live a longer life for yourself, for your loved ones, if you want to be around, if you want to be active, you need to exercise. You need to strength train. So of the types of exercise, you can, of course, do aerobic exercise, walking, jogging, swimming, and then, of course, my favorite aerobic exercise, which is cycling, and that will help burn visceral fat. Do those. Aim for at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity per week. I would say that is a minimum. More is better. So get on that bike, go for a long ride, do it a couple of days a week, go for a jog a couple of days a week, go for big hikes, integrate that into part of your life. But I'm going to give a special pitch out, even though I'm an endurance junkie by preference. I'm going to give a special shout out to strength training. Strength training builds muscles, and muscles burn calories and help increase our metabolic rate and reduce fat. The cool thing with having muscles on your body is that they, even when you're not using them, they consume energy, and fat is stored energy. And if you have very little muscles or very weak muscles, there's really they don't need that much energy. And so if you have very few muscles, there's not much fuel that they need. And if you are carrying excess fuel, if you're carrying excess fat, I think that the first thing that we tend to think about is cutting calories, which is certainly part of the equation. But even if you cut calories, if you first start cutting calories, your metabolism is going to slow. So now you've got this stored energy, this fat that is stored energy, whether it's subcutaneous fat or visceral fat, both ultimately. And when you stop eating or you really dramatically cut down on your fuel intake, your body goes into starvation mode and wants to store whatever you end up putting in your mouth, unless you give a reason to burn that stored fuel. And certainly aerobic exercise helps, but I would say strength training and having muscles on your body where you can literally sit there at your workstation during the day, or when you're sleeping, or when you're watching Netflix in the evening, and your muscles are just they need extra calories even when you're at rest. So more muscles means consuming more calories, consuming more of that stored fat. So that is really the biggest pitch I could get. Of course, have a clean diet, definitely, have a smart lifestyle for sure. But if nothing else, strength train. If you're not sure how to do that, you can check out some of my other episodes. I've talked about how to introduce a strength training program. And of course, you can reach out to me at my contact information. I'm happy to give you some tips, take you on board my roster, and really, give you some massive changes, kind of like we're seeing with Ryan. Another exercise approach could be what they'll say is HIIT training, so high intensity training. I think this is, even though I'm saying this because this is what I've read, if you are not accustomed to exercising regularly, I would hold off on any sort of this HIIT training, this high intensity interval training, because your body really needs to be prepared to take on the demands of high intensity. And I spent almost 30 years in the rehab industry and an occupational therapist, a certified hand therapist, and a strength coach. And so I work with a lot of athletes and people who are, introducing themselves into a healthy lifestyle end up coming to see me from the medical side of things. And it's a little bit heartbreaking when people they feel like they want to flip a switch. I'm going to start training. I'm going to start doing some big things. I'm going to really want to cut down on my fat. They're probably thinking subcutaneous fat more than visceral fat, but really want to cut down on my fat, be healthy. And so they sign up for this HIIT class, and pretty soon their body feels like they've been hit by a truck. Their tendons are inflamed. They've torn something. They've got some tendonitis or tendinopathy. So HIIT training is certainly good to reduce visceral fat and can help reduce subcutaneous fat, our love handles. But if you haven't been on a regular exercise program recently, don't start there. Start with doing a preparatory phase of strength training, which again, I've spoke about in a previous episode. So you can check that out, but don't go from couch to box jumping, please. A third thing you can do to reduce your visceral fat and all the negative metabolic consequences associated with that is think about some lifestyle modifications. So this is managing stress. There's very real correlation between chronic stress, which increases cortisol levels and actually therefore promotes visceral fat accumulation. So you're stressed, your body says, let's release some cortisol. Your body, next step of that is, okay, let's store some visceral fat. So, which sounds like a vicious cycle if you stress too much about that. But the point being, find things that can decrease your stress level, like yoga, like meditation, like deep breathing. I'm a big fan of the Calm app. Works for me. It's brief guided meditations, 7 minutes long, or longer ones if that's what you're into. But please manage your stress. There's a whole other, I think I've done at least one episode on stress and anxiety that has very real negative consequences to health span and longevity. So check out that episode, but manage your stress. Another lifestyle factor for decreasing fat is sleep. You need to get high quality sleep. I've also done a couple episodes on that. Check those out for the details on that. Alcohol consumption. Excessive alcohol intake is linked to increased visceral fat. If you are listening to this and you are somebody who consumes alcohol regularly and consistently, you are a person that has excess visceral fat. You're setting yourself up to be a ticking time bomb, and limiting consumption of alcohol if you're a moderate or a heavy drinker, limiting alcohol consumption may be the single biggest thing you'd possibly do, at the very least for visceral fat, but probably for your lifespan overall anyhow. Another lifestyle modification would be getting regular checkups, which is going to take us here in a moment to how you can check and find what your current fat level is, what your current percentage is, both of subcutaneous fat and visceral fat. But ultimately, these lifestyle modifications really in part revolve around making sure you have a plan that is specific to you. You have a lifestyle that's specific to you, that is addressing your personal needs, your personal goals. Like I'm working with Ryan on his personal needs and his personal goals. But in order to do that, we have to have things that are measured. So the question is, as of right now, what percentage of your fat is visceral fat today, right now, as you're listening? Well, you can find out. You can find out by getting a DEXA scan, DEXA scan. A DEXA scan is an imaging technique that uses x-rays to truly identify fat and lean mass. It's a very short test on the scheme of things. This is the test that I had a couple months ago now. It's a test that I had a couple months ago where I laid down on a bed and didn't move. And I think it took maybe 14 or 15 minutes. I think they can take 10 to 20 minutes long. It's non-invasive. You sit there with your clothes on and just don't move. And these x-rays will, through the magic of x-rays, you will end up with a bunch of information, a report that includes bone mineral density. So the thing to think about here is osteoporosis. And so once you get DEXA scan, you will get a report, a number on how dense your bones are, basically the health of your bones. And the DEXA scan will put you in a percentile or I should say that once you get the DEXA scan, you should be given a report that will put you in a specific percentile. That will give you an indication of whether you are in a healthy range or you need to make some changes to improve your bone density. So when I get mine done, I'm in the 77th percentile. It'll also, the DEXA scan will also give you your body mass index. So it'll put your body weight, body mass on a range of from underweight to normal, overweight, obese, or severely obese. And that, again, there are health consequences for both being underweight and overweight, and certainly obese or severely obese, but it'll give you a number on where you are at, all by simply laying down on a table for 10 to 15 minutes. You're going to get these numbers, this data, and it will give you true numbers that, should you choose to make changes, if you get these numbers and you're not satisfied with where they're at, or you're even worse, if you're concerned about where they're at, you can make objective changes to your lifestyle and get reassessed and see, is it working? Are you changing your metabolism? Is your physicality changing? Is your risk for metabolic conditions, is it changing by the actions you are taking, especially if you took those actions I just spoke about a minute ago? But you need numbers, you need data, you need to figure out where you're starting from. This is where a DEXA scan comes in. It will give you a specific visceral fat number, and it will either say you're right on target, you look great, or hey, you're at risk. You don't want to be at risk. So DEXA scan is great because it's great for early detection of osteoporosis. It's great for really giving personal insights into your overall health and well-being. It is non-invasive, which is great. It can track progress over time. So again, I got mine done a few months ago, not because I felt ill, but as a guy in his early 50s and trying to be health conscious and make wise decisions about my health because I want to live a long, vibrant life. I would like to get numbers today. So in the years to come, I want to get retested and be able to make sure that I'm staying in a healthy range. Super glad to see that my report shows that I'm in healthy ranges for everything. But is that going to stay the same in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years? And if something starts to change, if suddenly I get tested in a few years and my visceral fat has gone up, I know something is wrong. My body has changed. For some reason, my body is storing more visceral fat. I'm at a higher risk for heart disease, higher risk for diabetes. So it's a nice, non-invasive way to figure out where I'm at and to make changes as needed. And if it's not needed, great. If I get tested again in a year and the numbers are still the same, great. It's just proof of what I'm doing is working for me. So that brings us to, how much does this cost? So a DEXA scan can range in cost from $100 to $300. And so I've looked this up depending on certainly where you are in the country, what sort of resources are available to you in your community. You may be able to get one through your healthcare provider. You may be able to utilize health insurance. You may be able to utilize your healthcare spending account, or you may not. If you have a condition that's already been established, you may be able to, like osteoporosis, for example, that may be part, your physician may actually order a DEXA scan or some other type of scan to test your bone density. But the bottom line is, for what may be a couple of $100, even if you just do it once, and see where you're at now, it is a marker of time. At this point in time, here's your bone density, here's your lean muscle mass, here is your subcutaneous fat, here is your visceral fat. There it is. You take it home, you look it over, and you think, great, I'm spot on, or I better think about making a few of these lifestyle changes because I want to live a long, healthy, vibrant. For me, if you are like me and you don't have a physician who's saying you better go get scanned because I'm worried about you, you can kind of choose how important it is for you to have this data. My suggestion would be, if you are going to be somebody like Ryan, my client, maybe once a year would be, or annually, it would be good to get tested to see if these exercise changes, the nutrition changes, the stress controlling changes are really having an impact on these numbers that were initially really concerning. And if after getting this done year over year, there's a really positive trend line, That's great. Once you get to a point where you may get tested and you see, hey, this is right where I want to be. This is great. And if you hold steady, so I'm going to speak for myself here, I may get one next year, but if nothing has really changed in my life or my lifestyle and feel really good, I may wait 2 years to get it done. I probably won't go beyond that because I'm kind of a nerd and I really want to find out. I love these data points for myself. So every 1 to 2 years, I see myself spending a couple $100, which is, it's real money. But for somebody who also enjoys the sport mountain biking, it turns out that I've dropped a couple $100 on numerous occasions on various components and parts for my mountain bike, and I might as well spend a few $100 on myself, because if I have a great mountain bike and I'm not in shape enough, or I have a medical condition that's creeping up on me, it doesn't do me any good. But this brings us to the one thing you can do today to extend your health span. And I've basically already said it. I hope it's crystal clear. You are worth $100 or maybe a few $100. But the one thing you can do today is go online, type in DEXA scan near me, see what's available. There are some that are located in gyms. There are some that are located in, obviously, medical facilities. The place that I went to get mine was an independent freestanding, I guess it would be like a health clinic, I suppose. It was a physician's clinic, but they did, weight loss and nutrition and some testing. I also got VO2 tested there, resting metabolic rate tested. And you can go to one of these places, and there's probably one pretty near you. And for, again, not a lot of money, but for a ton of information that can really guide your future, you are totally worth it. And if you get the report back, and this is kind of the sales pitch of some of these facilities, is that they'll give you a report but won't give you much feedback on what to do next. You can either get feedback from them. You can talk to, if they have a health coach or something on staff, it may be worth, if there's like a red flag or something in your report, in your results, that you're not really sure what to do next, follow up with them. If you're still not comfortable or confident with that, follow up with me, send me the report. I love looking over this stuff. I'm happy to work with you. It's what I do. But most importantly, once you have numbers, once you have data, you can make change. You can make sure you're on the right path and cut yourself some slack. If you get numbers and then a year later you get retested and that something has slipped a little bit, I mean, that's unfortunate, but at least your body is responding to something in your lifestyle, so therefore you can change it. We all need to make changes from time to time. Especially, the bummer about this whole thing is that as we age, our body changes all the time. So we're constantly a moving target. So what's working for you today, from your sleep habits and your nutrition and your exercise, what's working for you today may not work quite as well for you in a year from now, which sucks. Especially if you get a nice routine, like, hey, this is really working for me. What we find as we get older is that, those cheat meals and, being a little bit too lax on our health and nutrition and exercise, there are real consequences. When you're a young person, you can kind of get away with a little bit more. But for those of us that are of the age where we get AARP letters in the mail every month, we really can't slack off. But once you have the data, you can do something about it. With that, I appreciate your time. Your one thing is to get a DEXA scan. It is to be mindful of your visceral fat and your subcutaneous fat. That's a whole other, it's a similar issue, but it's a separate concern, at least as of this episode. So I want to be clear that visceral fat and subcutaneous fat are different. The subcutaneous fat is perhaps what we think of if we're going to go to the beach. The visceral fat, the fat that's woven in and around our organs that are not part of our love handles, that visceral fat is dangerous. It can be dangerous. It's a little bit of it is necessary. Anything more than what is within a healthy range, and we've got some very serious consequences that can end our life early. Please do me a favor, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you would subscribe to my channel, I would greatly appreciate it. If you're listening to this in your earbuds as you're walking the dog, that's good. That's great. Please subscribe to this on wherever you do get your podcasts. I'm very grateful for your time. If you have any questions at all, you can comment directly through the podcast platform or on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, I respond to everybody. If you have any questions, or if you want further information on fat, on diet, on any sort of nutrition, sleep, healthy habits, all those pillars of HealthSpan, let me know. So until then, be well.